Hello, everyone, and welcome to my final Star Wars book review of 2016. And I obviously wanted to go out on a high note, wanted to make sure that the book I covered to close out the year was a really, really big one, and one that was significant in the expanded universe canon. And given that this particular character has recently made his return to the silver screen, and given that this particular character that I'm going to focus on is without question the greatest icon in all of Star Wars. I mean, he is just, when you think Star Wars, you instantly think of this character, and that character is none other than the one, the only, Darth Vader, one of the all-time great cinematic villains. And his story has been one that's, it's evolved and changed so much over the years since the original film, where he was pretty much just I don't want to say a standard bad guy, but he was a very cool, menacing, awesome villain that in the first movie we had some context to his backstory provided by Obi-Wan, but he wasn't like a major player in the first movie. But from Empire Strikes Back onward, his role in Star Wars has been just inseparable. I mean, he is the icon of Star Wars, and in some ways that kind of hurt the prequel trilogy because they took it to a whole nother level by making him Space Jesus and all this other stuff. But I mean, you really can't think of Star Wars without associating it with Darth Vader more than any other character, including like the Lukes, the Hans, the Leias, R2-D2, C-3PO, Chewbacca, Yoda, Obi-Wan, name them all. Darth Vader is the guy. He is the definitive character in all of Star Wars. So like I said, he just recently made his return to the silver screen with Star Wars Rogue One, which I'll be seeing tomorrow, actually. And I wanted to close out the year with something big and something that focused on Darth Vader. So what better way to do that than to cover something, again, this is kind of new for me. I'm going to be reviewing an entire trilogy of books, and they're all centered around Darth Vader's story, the Dark Lord trilogy. This trilogy, which I have all as one big paperback, it encompasses 3 books. Labyrinth of Evil by James Luceno. I hope to God I'm pronouncing that name right. If I'm not, I'm sorry. I'm sure somebody will say so down in the comments below. But yeah, this encompasses Labyrinth of Evil, which takes place during the closing days of the Clone Wars. The Revenge of the Sith novelization, which obviously covers the events of Revenge of the Sith. That was written by Matthew Stover and is highly regarded, and which is really kind of neat if you think about it, considering how lowly regarded the prequels are. The novelization actually very highly regarded amongst expanded universe novels. And the follow-up to that, Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader, also written by James Luceno. Again, sorry if I butchered your name. But this trilogy, since all the events of these 3 books all happen so close to each other, and they just happen one after the other, it really makes sense to kind of package them together in a trilogy. And to be perfectly honest, they kind of probably work as the prequel trilogy we should have gotten in the movies. But, and I don't want to sound like I'm one of those guys that constantly hates on the prequels and shit on the prequels. I know I've made this point before, but I don't passionately hate the prequels like a lot of other people do. They are heavily flawed, though, and there are a lot of story elements that don't make sense. I don't like the over-reliance on CGI. Jar Jar Binks is annoying. The acting is very stilted and wooden in places, and some of the dialogue is really bad. But, I mean, there are a lot of problems with the prequel films, and since this is really a prequel-era story, all 3 books, I mean, one of the movies is covered in these books, I guess I could talk about the prequel material that exists outside of the movies, and that encompasses the Clone Wars animated shows, both of them, the 2D one and the 3D one, both of which I really like. Some of the video games, Pod Racer, I thought was a really good game on N64, one of my more favorite racing games. There was a Clone Wars game that was really good. And in the books, there's a lot of prequel-related material that is actually really, really good, these books included. And I think part of the reason for that is, and this really ties into Labyrinth of Evil especially, a lot of the prequel-related material seemed to be geared towards fixing a lot of the mistakes from the prequels and trying to explain the shit that just plain old doesn't make sense. And Labyrinth of Evil is probably the best example of that. I was literally, while I did enjoy the book and while it is really well written, I was laughing the entire time while I was reading it because the whole thing feels like an apology for a lot of the shit that just was not covered in the prequel films. And one of my biggest glaring issues, one of my big questions about the prequel and the way the story plays out. Okay, so in Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan finds out that there's a clone army for the Republic, and the order was put in to Kamino. The order was put in to the cloners of Kamino by Master Sifo-Dyas. We never find out who the fuck Master Sifo-Dyas is in the movies. Again, that's where a lot of the prequel-related materials kind of fill in those gaps. I was like, it sounded like, when I first saw the movie, it sounded like a fake name. And it's like, that sounds like Sidious. Like, so I assumed, like, Sidious put in the order. It's like, oh, no, wait, there really is a Master Sifo-Dyas? So, like, all right. Moving on, then. And clearly this clone army was ordered under very shady circumstances. And later in the movie, Obi-Wan gets told by Count Dooku that the Senate is now under the control of the Sith Lord. At no point in episodes 2 or 3 do Obi-Wan, Yoda, Mace Windu, the Jedi, any of them, try to follow up on any of that. They never follow up on where the clone army came from. They never follow up on, it's like, oh, was Count Dooku telling the truth, or was there something worth looking into, or whatever? They don't look into any of that. And that always bothered me, because it felt like, guys, those are some pretty big... Actually, another big one, the movies never reveal who deleted the files on Kamino from the Jedi archives. I mean, I assumed it was Count Dooku, but again, the movie never makes that clear. And you really just have to rely on the books to really get a lot of that information. And that really just points out more of the weaknesses of the movie, because the movies really should be able to stand on their own. But you look at something like Labyrinth of Evil, the entire story is about Obi-Wan and Anakin. They're on Cato Nemoidia, and they get into a battle, and they come across Newt Gunray's, the very highly esteemed viceroy of the Trade Federation. They come across his mechano chair, which is that big spider chair thing. I assume it's the big spider chair thing he was writing in episode 1. And they find transmissions from Darth Sidious, and they use that as a method of tracking down Darth Sidious and trying to find out who he is, where he is, and what he's planning. And it's like, oh, so the Jedi did have an investigation into who Darth Sidious is. And various other things, like, okay, cool. Something that should have been done in the movies, but okay, fine, whatever, I'll go with it. And it really, what this story does is allow Anakin and Obi-Wan to hang out with each other and have more of a bond and a friendship beyond just them. Because that was really another one of the faults of the prequels, is that the bond between Anakin and Obi-Wan is hardly felt at all in the prequels. In episode 1, which was one of the biggest sins of that movie, Obi-Wan and Anakin barely, and I mean barely, converse with each other, which to me, like, all the stuff that Qui-Gon does with Anakin, that should have been Obi-Wan doing that. That's the bond that should have been there from the very beginning, and that should have been what the trilogy was about, that friendship and it going south. And then in episode 2, they're just bickering at each other, and Anakin, sounds like he hates him, and Obi-Wan sounds like he's sick to death of him. Like, what kind of friendship is this? And then in Revenge of the Sith, it's there a little bit, but then they get separated again. So the real, what should be the emotional core of the prequel trilogy is really underplayed, and that's a huge, huge mistake. So any material or any stories that focuses on their relationship and helps it showcase it in a much friendlier light, I think is a good thing. The Clone Wars animated show did that very well. The 3D one. I mean, the 2D one, season 1 of the 2D one, Anakin's still a whiny bitch and annoying as all hell. And it's like, God, Obi-Wan, I want him to just smack him. But in season 2, they made up for that a little bit more. But although the Clone Wars, the 2D Clone Wars cartoon is going to come up again in a couple minutes, so be forewarned. But it's so the friendship just, it's not really there in the movie. So anytime the books can kind of fill in that gap, I'm happy with it, because that really should have been the main focus of the prequels all along. So that's nice to see. We also get more insight into Count Dooku and Count Dooku and General Grievous as characters, which again, their roles in the Clone Wars and the prequel movies is horribly underplayed. I mean, it's like, my God, man, you got Christopher Lee to play this role, and we hardly know anything about him or what his plan is or why he's doing what he's doing. Because as the movies play out, he's really just a puppet of Darth Sidious. We don't really know anything about him or why he joined up with Darth Sidious or anything like that. And again, that's where the books and the TV shows have to kind of fill in those gaps. And especially in the episode 3 novelization, we found out he's kind of a racist, and that's something that Palpatine has as well. And that's part of their whole thing of gaining control and taking control of the galaxy, is that they're kind of racist, and there's like a human superiority thing there, which kind of, not the most creative angle, but it's something. And it does make sense if you look at the Empire in the original trilogy. They are they're not diverse at all. I mean, it's all just British guys everywhere. It's just British guys and white-clad stormtroopers, and then you have Darth Vader running around. It's like, there's really not a lot of diversity in the Galactic Empire itself. The most diverse areas in the Star Wars universe are like in the cantinas or Jabba's palace or places like that, like the underbelly, like the underworld. And, there's always material floating around that the Wookiees were enslaved, and droids are obviously second-class citizens in the Star Wars universe. So that angle actually does make sense to me. And, again, it's nice that Labyrinth of Evil was able to cover a lot of Count Dooku and what he does, and General Grievous and how he became General Grievous. Because, again, these are major characters. Like Count Dooku is supposed to be the face of the Separatist movement. General Grievous is supposed to be the droid general that the entire, the success of the Clone Wars hinges on him. Like, defeating him is the key to for the Republic to end the war, and we hardly know anything about him. And we don't really get to see much of him in Episode 3. So, them fleshing out his backstory here in this book, again, very, very good. And another thing I should probably cover, they incorporate a protocol droid named TC-16, who I assumed, when I read the book the first time, I assumed it was the protocol droid from Episode 1, from the opening scene of Episode 1. I'm like, no, that droid would have been destroyed. But, so I'm assuming it's not the same character. But yeah, I thought that droid was a pretty funny character. And again, anytime you get a good droid character in Star Wars, it's always a hoot. Always a fan of that. But the book ends, and this is where I'll tie this back into the Clone Wars cartoon. And my defense of Disney, actually, I didn't really have a problem with them dropping the EU for their new continuity, because I kind of feel like it's like, guys, there's a lot of EU material there that they would have to follow. And I feel like if they're making new movies, they should be able to start with a clean slate, because that's like expecting any filmmaker to keep in line with the massive EU continuity. I mean, that's impossible. And also, it raises a lot of expectations, because it's like, all right, you're making a movie that takes place 30 years after Return of the Jedi. The best Star Wars story to do would be the Thrawn trilogy, but you can't do it because Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill are too old. I mean, that story is supposed to take place right after Return of the Jedi, and I highly doubt anything you do. Whatever you do is going to have to incorporate the Thrawn trilogy, and will most likely not be as good as the Thrawn trilogy. So it's kind of a hard thing to do, and I had no problem with them dropping the EU continuity and doing their own thing. Also, I mean, to me, it's just a separate timeline. Now, I've made that point. But another point I would like to make is, I guarantee you that the EU is so massive that there is material out there that contradicts each other. And look at Labyrinth of Evil, and then look at Season 2 of the 2D Clone Wars show, which ends with the invasion of Coruscant. The events of this book, which ends with the invasion of Coruscant, and the events of the cartoon are vastly different and don't match up together at all. So to me, it's it points to what I've been saying. It's like, yeah, I guarantee you there's expanded universe material that contradicts each other, and that's a perfect example of it. So again, don't have a problem with Disney dropping the EU and starting fresh. And they can't take my books away from me, so it's fine. I was like, I can still enjoy this timeline all I want, so it doesn't really matter. And then you have other examples like Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which that book is so non-canon. It's not even there's no way that book is even remotely close to being anything that can be considered canon. The way it's written and the way it plays out, it's no, just no. But But yeah, Labyrinth of Evil, like I said, it made me laugh because it's basically written to fill a lot of the gaps that the prequels just didn't bother to cover. But as a standalone book, I think it works very well. It works better than the prequel films do. So, very enjoyable book. In book 2, episode 3, try and make sense of that. Book 2 in this trilogy, but it's episode 3 in the prequel trilogy. I don't know, it's crazy. But the novelization of episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, like I said, was very highly regarded and very well liked by Star Wars fans and considered to be one of the bigger and better EU books. And I would say I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite EU novels, but it is probably the best of the novelizations because I typically judge novelizations by how much they offer that the movie doesn't. Not necessarily pointing out flaws in the movie, but it's like, all right, can you offer me a different experience from the movie? Because I don't want to feel like I'm just reading the movie. I want to feel like the book is offering me something different. And I feel like the Revenge of the Sith novel does that very, very well. Again, we get more internal struggles between, or internal, I guess we'll call it that, internal struggles between the characters and what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And a lot of little touches that are just very good, like Obi-Wan assuming that Anakin was killed in Order 66 before being shocked that he was actually the leader of it and he was actually behind it. Little touches like that. Dooku realizing he'd been double-crossed, and some of his interior monologues prior to the lightsaber battle that ultimately led to his downfall. Yoda realizing he was no match for Emperor Palpatine. Obi-Wan and Anakin learning new lightsaber techniques that they used in the lightsaber battle with Dooku. Bunch of little touches like that really make the book stand out and really add a few extra layers that the movie didn't quite have. Also, it benefits from, the over-reliance on CGI is not there because obviously a book is a very different medium from a movie. And the clunky dialogue is not there. So it's a really... when people say that Revenge of the Sith is the best of the prequels, it really is. You can see the really good movie in there. It's just those problems that just haunt the prequels. And if you remove that stuff, Revenge of the Sith is pretty good. Like, it's pretty damn good. And the tragedy of Anakin's fall and ultimate battle with his mentor Obi-Wan is a lot more... I can feel it a lot more in this book than I did in the movie. And the ending of him becoming Darth Vader and realizing that his life is pretty much over and all the stuff like that. That's also very good. And also plays nicely into the third book, which I'll get into in a minute. But, I think as far as the movie novelizations go, I don't think you can do any better than Revenge of the Sith. I think it's by far the best of the novelizations. Without question. But I guess that'll lead me into the third book, Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader, which is a very, a story I always wanted, quite honestly. It's Darth Vader in the early days of being Darth Vader, and what was that like? And it's awesome, and I really like this book. And again, it's not necessarily the best written book of all the EUs, but just the fact that it tackled a story that I always wanted really made it stand out to me, and it just gave me what I wanted, and I'm just happy with it. But basically, we see Darth Vader be the guy that Obi-Wan described in A New Hope. He helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights, and now that he's in the suit, and now that he's learning how to be in the suit, and because there's a lot of limitations that go with that. Anakin was a very athletically gifted young Jedi, and now he's a robot man in a life support suit that can barely move, but he's tall as shit and powerful as fuck. So that's really he has to completely change his fighting style, completely change how he lives and just lives his day-to-day life. So it's really a horrible existence, quite honestly. And it's great to see that. And Shadows of the Empire touched up on that as well, which was also very nice. But it's just nice to see that tragic side of Darth Vader, where it's he's a broken man. He is a broken man. And him learning how to be the face of the Empire and the face of fear and the right hand. Well, Mara Jade's the right hand of the Emperor, but it's, you know what I mean. The Emperor's hand, I should say. But, just having to be the enforcer of the Emperor's will and learning to be that in the early days as the remaining Jedi, few of them as there are, And the main Jedi that are focused on in this story are Master, was it Shine? I forget. Like, it's spelled very weirdly. Shine and Starstone, and his Padawan. And they're on the run for most of the book, and really, the book is largely about Darth Vader hunting them down and basically becoming Mr. Jedi Hunter, which is, it's the Darth Vader story I always wanted. Like, him just hunting down Jedi and whatever's left and just wiping out what's left of the Order. And you saw that a little bit, for those of you who watched the cartoon shows, you saw that a little bit in Star Wars Rebels, especially in Season 2. And he was, oh my god, Darth Vader was so cool in Star Wars Rebels. He was so great. And I've already heard he was amazing in Rogue One, so I can't wait to see it. But again, if you want, like, I think this story especially is the prequel movie that a lot of us wanted in the 90s. Not Anakin Skywalker as a kid, not whiny Anakin falling in love. We want to see Darth Vader hunting down Jedis and killing them, and that's what this book gives you. So, just very good stuff all around. And if Darth Vader is a character that you highly regard, I highly recommend checking this out. Even if you're not a fan of the prequels, I think, like I said, it fills a lot of the gaps that the prequels don't cover. The second book in particular, I think, is very well written. And the third book gives you the story you always wanted, to have Darth Vader in. So, I highly recommend the Dark Lord trilogy, especially if Darth Vader is your thing, and if you're a Star Wars fan, why wouldn't he be? I mean, he is, like I said, he is the icon of everything that is Star Wars. But, so, like I said, that is my final Star Wars review for 2000. My final book review. My review of Rogue One will actually be coming tomorrow night. But, so look forward to more of these in 2017. I definitely have a lot more of these lined up. Most of the ones I've done so far have been very positive. That was not necessarily by design. It just kind of happened that way. There will be some negative ones in 2017 because that's more fun, right? You got to be mean and nasty. I will say that the one I plan on doing in February is going to be very, very negative. So be on the lookout for that. I'm not going to give any other hints other than that, but yeah, I've enjoyed doing these Star Wars reviews. Hope you all have found it entertaining as well. But like I said, this is the final one for the year, so I guess I'll see you all in 2017.